countries to prosperity or to damnation. अब इन वजूहात की बिना पे ये आज का जो प्रोग्राम है या आज का जो तकरीब है, इसमें हम लोगों का इकट्ठा होना ज़रूरी है। और मेरा ये काम था इस आज की तकरीब के लिए कि मैं एक नुस्खा आप लोगों की खिदमत में पेश करूँ, चाहे वो जितना भी कड़वा हो या जितना भी वो टेढ़ा हो, मगर उसका नुस्खे का सामने आना ज़रूरी इसलिए है कि उसके ऊपर अगर डिबेट हो जाए या उसकी नफ़ी हो जाए या उसको मान लिया जाए तो उससे कम एक रास्ते का तयन हो सकता है कि हमें पढ़ना नहीं सकता। इस नाते से मैंने एक तकरीर वज़ा की है और उसके साथ ही फॉर्म्स पैकेज का एक पर्चा है जो आप लोगों को आप जब इस हॉल में दाखिल हुए तो आपको पेश किया गया है, वो आपके पास इन बैग्स के अंदर मौजूद है। किसी भी मसले को हल करने के लिए एक तारीखी तज्ज़िया करना ज़रूरी है। दूसरी चीज़ ये कि हमें ये भी तय करना ज़रूरी है कि ऐसा हो रहा है, ग्राउंड रियलिटीज़ क्या हैं और उनका हल क्या है। तो मैंने जसारत की है कि वो कि अंग्रेज़ी में तकरीर है, मैंने जसारत ये की है कि अपनी तकरीर को 3 हिस्सों में मैंने तकसीम किया है। पहले हिस्से में तारीखी पस मंज़र है जिससे हम लोग सब गुजर चुके हैं। दूसरा हिस्सा जो है वो ग्राउंड रियलिटीज़ का है कि हमारे सामने हो क्या रहा है, और तीसरा हिस्सा सॉल्यूशंस का है कि इन हालात का हल क्या है और क्या होना चाहिए। So I will now address you with my formal speech, which is in English, and my apologies, it cannot be in Urdu because of a variety of reasons, predominantly the terminologies which are used for economics, and to also cater to the request of the English media. History. We are 3/4 of a century after the formation of Pakistan, and it is incumbent that we review the journey we have covered and the milestone we are at. Decisively, we are living in a world of colonial supremacy that internationally is gasping for breath. Now this decade, and I'll pause here just for a second, this decade is there to kick the American and European colonial supremacy in Asia. And there is absolutely no dispute about this, and we can see the signs all around us. The colonists started dividing the world way back in 1903 because the global population was beyond their control. Nation states came into being, and while a politically corrupt draftsman, they didn't even hire an architect. While a politically corrupt draftsman was there to draw lines to carve nation states, we see a planet with 183 plus countries with flags and pseudo-sovereignty. Pakistan was no exception, except that it came about based on an ideology with the vibrance of Islam. The potency and vibrance of the Islamic ideology is to equitably manage population pockets, is ingrained in the ideology to even lead the world. These nation states, so created, were designed to macro-manage the population only, although the leverage for continued colonial control was based on politically devised constitutions, demanding allegiance to a flag. More, debt was and remains the hidden item on the agenda of the colonists for pseudo-sovereign existence of nation states, keeping the colonial sway intact. Global politics, therefore, today is based on a deceptive and biased canvas of economics and nationalism. In the Pakistan scenario, our leadership in succession succumbed to the colonial agenda, and despite resistance by our Qaid, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, fell into the debt trap, compromising on our founding ideology. And this is our history and the status quo today. Now this is the historical background we are reckoning with. So the ground reality is what we have to now address. The ground reality from the perspective of we business people, from the perspective of the economists, from the perspective of entrepreneurs. We look at it this way. First, our leadership in succession denied our founding ideology. That was number one. And number two, by keeping us the population that funds the government out of self-determination for our course forward, our real independence was compromised. That means the population, which is us, the people, and we are funding the government, and we are doing it through direct and indirect taxes. I mean, the extent of taxes that we are reckoning with, one can safely say that a child in the womb of a mother is also paying taxes today. And we keep hearing political slogans that we have to increase the tax net. I say this with great responsibility and historical evidence because the ground reality is as has been from 1958. This can be referred to as a coup by the servants of the people against the people. The four basic institutions of the state, i.e. the judiciary, the armed forces, the civil bureaucracy and the parliamentarians, are huddled into a league to structure governance reliant upon an ideologically opposed constitution and the buzzword democracy to keep us, the people, gagged. Nation states that have risen to have a sway among the communities of nations via governments and serve the people and not rule them. We unfortunately have had rulers and a deceptive bunch that hide behind the Constitution and so-called democracy to legitimize our pro-colonial status quo. What they evidently have done to usurp this position as rulers instead of being servants has been dividing the country's population into ethnic, parochial, provincial, and religious captive political constituencies for creating their choice of political leadership that can keep us, the people, gagged and enslaved. This is why we hear the term elected. This multifarious and nefarious polarization of society has safely kept the attention of the population on a constant stage political drama of unending splendor, whilst the true power center for policy rests behind a smoke screen. This institutional deception has further entrenched itself by laws on subversion, contempt, sedition, and the primacy of the parliament to keep audit and inquisition of the people out of their hair. Let me explain this. I mean, if you take the four institutions of the state, you take the judiciary, you take the armed forces, you take the civil bureaucracy, and you take all the parliamentarians. What is happening is that all of them are almost free of audit. It's our money, it's the taxpayers' money which is funding them. And they're all free of audit. And you cannot question their deeds, you cannot question what they're doing, even if they're doing something wrong. Because they have already got the parliament to enact laws on subversion. That means if you criticize the army, you can go into the jail, you can go behind bars for subversion. You criticize the judiciary, they'll take you in for contempt. You criticize the civil bureaucracy, they'll take you in on sedition. And similarly, if you, God forbid, criticize a member of the parliament, he'll either kill you, or because he belongs to a captive constituency, he is supposed to be the ruler of your area and you're supposed to vote for him, irrespective of whether you like it or not. You don't. So we are living in pockets of, like in a monarchy, we are living in pockets where you have people having captive constituencies, and that is why you have electables in this country. Now, this is a problem. And because it's a problem, it's being raised in this particular reality on the ground. This is the reality on the ground where slavery of 222 million people has been induced to submit and remain subservient to the colonist agenda globally. Through the lens of an economic periscope, we can evidently see that starting from the president of Pakistan down to a janitor at KFC, there are about 2.6 million stage actors on the payroll of us, the people, who are 222 million plus. These 2.6 million cover the judiciary, the armed forces, the civil bureaucracy, and the parliamentarians. When we examine the budget, and this is forensic, when we examine the budget, we see that 82% is being spent on them, 2.6 million people, and for us, the 222 million, only 18% is on the table. This is the evidence of a grand heist, and the actors in our national saga that were and remain are all recorded in the annals of our glorious history. The slanderous political drama, जिसको उर्दू में आप नौसरबाजों की नौटंकी कह सकते हैं, the slanderous political drama we see to the detriment of our economy is for keeping our eyeballs glued to this nonsense, while the film remains intact for the retention of the status quo of colonial subservience. We the people have suffered and seemingly are being pushed to keep suffering. This entire gathering, in any case, is in our defense, in the defense of 222 million people, not the 2.6 million that are fiddling around. This nonsense, however, is unacceptable to us because of the following reasons. Number one, the status of all these four institutions is that of servants working on a defined job description at the pleasure and cost of us the people, and this is being denied. Point two, the current structure of governance is against our founding ideology and the Constitution that warrants unity and not divisions. Social fragmentation. This is also being denied. Next, borrowing on interest is waging war against Allah that cannot be thrust on 222 million people by a handful of about 1,000 odd bureaucrats from the four above mentioned institutions. And finally, our natural resources are being scavenged by alien takers while our national wealth is depleting to a point of bankruptcy. We are a rich country for both natural resources and human resources beyond any question of doubt. These are the realities of the ground. And based on these realities and the history, we have to now view some sort of a solution. And the solution will never come from these people. The solution will have to come from us, the people, the taxpayers, the business community, the entrepreneurs, the investors in this economy. In my humble submission, the solution simply put as our demand is to revert to our ideology. And ideology is very, very, very significant. Let me explain this. Let's take China. I mean, what you see as communist China which came about in 1948, a year after us, has stuck to their ideology of communism, although it is evolving. And today you see China as a superpower, beyond any question of doubt, and a leader in the field of economics in Asia. Let's take Israel, which was a military outpost for the white man's club in the Middle East. And they have engineered an ideology which they want to stick to for expansion and for their existence. And the entire Muslim countries around it can do nothing about it. Take the US itself, they are based on an ideology of capitalism. Take the ex-Soviet Union, which subscribed to socialism. And when we are founded, and we were founded on the basis of the Islamic ideology, I don't see any reason why we do not stick to it, because that provides us the strength. And I have a chart available for you, which I'll explain shortly, on the fishbone structure, establishing for you the significance of aligning ourselves to an ideology. And mind you, Islamic ideology must not, before I proceed further, must not be linked to the ideology of what we assign to clerics. It is Allah's ideology, not the mullah's ideology. So there is a distinction, a clear distinction. The ground reality being what it is, the situation is unacceptable because it is carrying us Muslims into a death trap of permanent slavery of the colonists. The actors in this saga upholding the status quo must be evicted, as they are only our servants and not divine appointees of Allah to consign us to the hell of life. The solution can never come from them, as they are not stakeholders as they like to be referred to, but have become an armed profit-taking cult. We, the tax-paying population, must mandate the institutions of the government for their job descriptions, and these are based on viewpoints in consonance with the ideology as follows. Number one, the establishment as the guarantor, upholder, and protector of our sovereignty must be embodied and be constituted under a precedent, with the heads of all institutions of the state as the members, strictly to protect any breach of our ideology in legislation and our operational management of the state. One institution cannot be referred to as the establishment because it invalidates all others. And we have seen this happen for the last 7 decades. To end legislation based on dichotomous laws, we must revert to our founding ideology for all liberties, permissible limits, and constraints as are provided by Allah in place of what is invoked, induced, and upheld by us, on us by the colonists and their notorious agents within us to uphold their agenda. To end the global replication of the colonist model for management of population in our society, which presents a contrary model to that of the Ummah, we need to invoke land management by creating 3,400 urban municipal companies or units in the country for applying the population as a basis for a new socio-political canvas and consequent tax rates. All other land must be demarcated into industrial, agricultural, mining, touristic sites, with space for essential areas like roads, canals, and defense needs. We need to corporatize Pakistan, duly regulated at all levels for standards and processes. towards, the 3,400 figure comes from a time when I drafted the tourism policy for this country in 1989, and I had to interact with the Surveyor General of Pakistan, and we figured that the entire population of Pakistan is located in 3,400 population pockets. And of what I have seen in China, for instance, they have managed to inhabit about 500 million people in the west of China based on urbanization. And that is the modern miracle. And this can happen in Pakistan for 222 million people very easily, and can also provide an upgrade to the population on all counts, including literacy and financial, fiscal decentralization. Towards freedom of our subservience to the financial slavery of the colonists, we absolutely must revert to our ideology and must choose a tangible medium to trade and save. An alien printed paper is decisively against our ideology and common sense. The rupee must be linked to gold, and our 1 paisa must be revalued at 1 milligram of gold. Alien paper is alien dominance. Gold has to be freed from the clutches of the bureaucracy and open for free export and import on the analogy of Singapore. The trade imbalance has to be settled in gold and not alien currencies. This will plow back the informal wealth into our economy, and the rupee can be contained within our borders as a domestic medium of exchange. Balance of trade and trading has to be in gold settlements. The dictates of the donors to tax essential items that support production must be disregarded instantly. They come and tell you to tax fuel. They come and tell you to tax people. They come and tell you things which are absolutely ridiculous because it kills our ability to produce. It kills our production levels, and it kills the incentive for future investments in the country. It is absolutely unacceptable. Institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, the IBRD, the Asian Development Bank, etc., with all due respect to Siddharth Bhai sitting here being a banker, they are colonial tools that have plagued the country for 7 decades, and we really don't want to see them, meet them, or have anything to do with them. I'll tell you one thing with great confidence, that this economy and the people are rich enough to settle their 130, 140 billion outstanding dollars in a hiccup. Next, towards strengthening our ability to counter the communist threat for departing from their dragnet, our armed forces and all other institutions must be reinforced in their own rights, and in tandem, production without reservations must be open free of bureaucratic interference to the private sector. Today, the bureaucracy has got in its clutches every facet of the economy. They must get out of it. These are not profit centers for them. It is not their business. The current scenario is the captivity of enterprise by the bureaucracy and their mentors, the politicians. Indigenous defense capability is at the root and crux of our dilemma for survival. The solution rests on the private sector, as did the creation of the atom bomb for Pakistan. Let's not forget that. But the atom bomb had to be created for Pakistan because Allah Hassan and Sayyid Abid perhaps, and a few others who were instrumental in making this happen. It was not any of our institutional bureaucrats. The cleansing of the country from the syndrome of debt needs to be tendered out in exchange of building contracts of our 3,400 cities at the front end of technology, of material technology. We must let foreign contractors in collaboration with domestic engineers build our infrastructure based on their taking reciprocating debt from us. The spiral generation of consequent production will ignite our industrial base and consequent exports and debt service without rigor. These development contracts over 25 years at no more than $10 billion per year or its worth in gold. In 2017, the Chinese government proposed through us, or through me if you like, as head of the private sector delegation visiting China, that we will urbanize all 3,400 pockets because we were surplus liquidity and we were surplus production. And we will take your debt in its totality, and at that particular point in time, the debt was 83 billion. Today, it has gone past 110 or 120 billion. The top brass at that time refused on two grounds. One, that they didn't want to give the entire contract to China. And two, that they did not want to finish their hold on the population. And to me personally, it irked me and still bothers me because the mindset is completely corrupted and deformed. The social reforms post-urbanization will see the demands of capital political constituencies and in tandem see a debt-free Pakistan. It will also see the ignition of hyper-industrialization for a population with a buying power. I will pause here to introduce to you the fishbone structure on the chart here and explain the concept. Nation state is just like our and it has diversity
मानसिक तस्वीर से नजर
Hello.
नहीं कह रहे
I mean, a nation state has to be just like any product.
भेजनी है किसी
So in the Pakistan scenario, what has been proposed is that you stick to your ideology. That is the vision. You brand it. So for a product that you want to sell some toothpaste or some mouthwash or something of that nature, what you do is you first go for the USP, selling point, then you go for branding, and then you go for marketing. So in the country scenario, if you have technology, then you have your legislation on that basis, you have your social contract on that basis. But if you need to determine your revenue stream, that comes from urbanization. This is what primarily has been proposed. And if you link your medium of exchange to gold, and today your prices will drop down instantly. That means you can sell your debt for 182 tons of gold.
in the Commonwealth enjoy. So if we plan it and we stick to this and we identify our revenue stream, we have a product which will sell in the Muslim world and in the world which has been oppressed by the colonists beautifully. Point 7. Our dependency on Europe and the US as export markets is a misnomer and guarantee a deformed balance of payment roadmap. In consonance with our ideology, the Muslim markets must be made duty-free for imports and exports of all commodities, travel and investment. Because this is our Commonwealth. Our Commonwealth is not anywhere else. You open your doors to them. You don't need to go to Europe, you don't need to go to America, you don't need to have a dependency status. We must allow institutions to rise in their leadership, to raise their leadership and independently from within themselves so they are internally audited and misconducts and they remain free from political bias. And if you want me to explain this any further, what I'm trying to basically say that if you hypothetically have the judiciary and you have the civil bureaucracy and you have the armed forces, let them choose their own leaders. The job of an elected government is to run the government based on your ideology and by the development of consensus with the institutions. Management of the government by the representatives of the people will only need to work on consensus building, development to achieve national targets marked and sealed by the ideological firm moorings. Point 9. No political force must exist that are not democratic within. They cannot come in the visage of being a democratic force when they don't practice democracy within their own ranks. 10. Finally, all land must be owned by one agency of the federal government and demarcated to house corporate urbanization, corporate farming, corporate mining and tourism as per dossiers circulated for all of our very honored guests present here. This is to end the land grabbing nuisance in the country and culturally alter the feudal mindset. I have distributed this reforms package for you to read and reflect upon. I rest my case and will be pleased to take questions as may arise in your minds. Our announcement was necessary because our national ship is adrift, and this time around we are in a whirlpool with no land in sight. The army cannot save you, nor can America. Global politics is based on economics. So free the economy from the bureaucratic clutches and the economy will save Pakistan. Inshallah. Pakistan, Pakistan.
बहुत शुक्रिया साहब, आपने बहुत इनलाइटमेंट किया है हमें। अब सवाल और जवाब का सिलसिला जो है वो शुरू करते हैं। तो सबसे पहले सवाल अतीक साहब है, क्योंकि इकॉनमी आपका भी बड़ा आंसर है।
I hope you don't mind. I need to sit on the chair. My legs are getting
big palaces of the business communities. I don't know the name, but I'm sorry this credit has gone to Karachi Editors Club. Wonderful that Karachi Editors Club has come forward say that what religious communities demand is for economic reforms. I think you have laid down everything and everything was in order. Nothing was mismanaged, nothing was miscreated. It was very well informed and enumerated. One thing which is missing from the economy is the charter of economy among the politicians. Please emphasize on that when we need the charter of politics, we need the charter of economy. All politicians in our country, whosoever they are or they may be, they are only talking about themselves, tall uses of themselves, waiting for each other's grudges and false uses. But nobody is getting together to become a charter of economy, to think seriously that how we can save our country. If Pakistan is there, the charter of economy is there, that means that this is the only solution. I would like you to kindly just sing down a few words for me, please.
See, the charter of economy as it is being used as a term today in the press as well, is not possible for the politicians to come to terms with. What you need is a legislative destination identified for your economics, for your economic destination be identified in your constitution. It means that if your economic canvas is going to be based on your ideology, then a charter of economics is possible. Other than that, it will become extremely difficult because each of these political parties we're talking about, maybe 14 or 15 of them today, they have all vested economic interests of their own. Pakistan is like a place they are scavenging. I mean, there are regional parties, and then there are parties who are family oriented, then there are parties which are ethnically based. So for them to come to terms, basically the only term they can come to is who will grab which profit center. So it will never be for Pakistan. So unless you have legislatively identified the rulings, the framework, all right, that we will work within this framework, will they be able to work on a charter of economics? That's my take on this.
Sir, thank you very much. My name is Iqbal Jamil. Your lecture was a really great tremendous one, and I hope that many of us very enlightened. But there was a missing point in that. Sitting here in this AC room, we always forget the rural population. I couldn't understand why we always talk about business and investment. Why not agriculture? Every Tom, Dick and Harry has in this country has always used to talk about the agriculture is backbone of our country. Your lecture also that. I'm surprised about no country can grow with the most 80% of the people live in rural areas. The only thing about urbanization and urban industrial growth in urban. What are your take on that?
All right. I have circulated a paper which I made a reference to called the reforms package, which is a bag which you have. Right. If you come to the first page, when you talk of agriculture, it is contributing only 36% of our GDP. Number one. Number two, it represents over 60% of our population. And this population is devoid of a buying power. They don't have any buying power. So when you talk of urbanization, basically you're taking a man who's a Hari or who is a Mazara from absolutely rudimentary living conditions into an urban environment. Then, when you're taking him into urban environment and you're linking your currency to gold, all too suddenly overnight, he has buying power. So he would like to send his children to school. He would ask for labor compensation, for which he gets only what they can produce from the land. An ordinary Mazara is getting 47 kgs of wheat to be as his labor compensation. That is the predominant scale in Punjab, for instance. So you can't rely on this. Urbanization is for this purpose, for empowering, fiscal empowerment of the population. So whether it is agriculture, or whether it is a mining labor, or it is somebody working in a coal mine, or it is somebody working as your domestic servant, irrespective, when you fiscally empower a population, they do not remain captive labor. And that is the purpose of urbanization. This model has worked all over Europe and has been working in America from 1774, for instance. So, I have not disregarded this. In fact, I will like to add, for the benefit of everybody else here, that our total area is about 881,913 square kilometers. And of this, if you take urbanization for 222 million people, we are just going to be reckoning with 170,000 square kilometers. The rest of the land is available, and that rest of the land which is available up to 19.28% for industrial estates, 19.3% only for agriculture. So, these people are exempt from taxes, the landowners, and they are also got captive labor. So urbanization will kill that. What we want to finish here is captive labors and captive constituencies for any tangible growth of the economy. And that is fundamental in my proposal.
आगा साहब, इमरान शेरवानी, जो 3 पॉइंट्स मुझे बहुत दिलचस्प लगे और एक चौथा जो एक सवाल के जवाब में निकल कर आया, और मैं चाह रहा हूँ कि थोड़ा सा उसके आप फर्दर, एक आपने कॉर्पोरेटाइजेशन की बात की, एक आपने जो उस अर्बनाइजेशन और उसको जो लिंक किया उससे, और फिर तीसरी चीज़ आपने ये कही कि द लैंड कंट्रोल शुड बी handed over to one state department, not government department, state department. Government का control तो government में तो पता नहीं कितने interest आ जाते हैं. And in response to a query, and even earlier you said that the vested interest जो है हमारे यहाँ जितनी political parties हैं, they represent either the interests of a region, of a language, of a family, of a sect, for example.
Yes.
ये सब कुछ चीज़ें हो रही हैं. But then who is Pakistan? Isn't it the collection of all those things? Or if Pakistan is already that party that is already controlling most of the land, और हम क्या कहते हैं अब कश्मीर बनेगा DHA, तो we already have an authority like that you mentioned. So we are going into that direction, and if we believe that if we define Pakistan as that authority, and if we put all other interests as at cross purposes with those interests, तो फिर हमारी इकॉनमी जो है वो डिसबैलेंस ही रहेगी. उसका बैलेंस अगर हम ये तय करते हैं सब मिलकर पाकिस्तान, सो मे बी वो जो कॉर्पोरेटाइजेशन वाला कॉन्सेप्ट है वो सबके इंटरेस्ट में होगा. मे बी वो जो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की ज़रूरत है वो सबको हो ही जाएगी, इसलिए कि दैट इज पैसा तो सभी को चाहिए, तरक्की तो सभी करना चाहेंगे उस तरह. जो
देखिए यहाँ पे जो माइंडसेट है वो फ्यूडल माइंडसेट है एक, और चूंकि इकोनॉमी के अंदर इकोनॉमी जो आपकी है वो ब्यूरोक्रेसी के कब्ज़े में है, और ये मैंने मेरे YouTube चैनल पे अगर आप देखना चाहें तो इस पर कई तकरीरें हैं मेरी विद फिगर्स। तो इनसे अगर आप हटना चाहते हैं इस माइंडसेट से, तो इंडियन एक्सपेरिमेंट वाज वेरी वेरी सक्सेसफुल कि 532 रियासत्स एज दे वर, आई मीन call them whatever you, they were I mean under kings and maharajas, they were all nationalized, all land was taken, and now the entire Indian as a country, I mean India now belongs to one federal government. So land in any form is being utilized on a leasehold basis. यहाँ के ऊपर take Karachi city alone, you have so many landlords that you can go crazy. You have cantonments as landlords, you have DHA as landlords, you have railway as landlords, you have port as landlords, you have civil aviation as landlords. Now, these institutions, you have PNSC as landlords. Now, their job was to grow in their own right for the jobs they were doing. So if they were paying a tax on the land holding to the federal government, they would have become internationally competitive. Right now, the chairman, for instance, of civil aviation, or whatever he's called, the DG of civil aviation, he's more concerned about what rent he can collect on the land which civil aviation holds. Similarly with Karachi Port Trust, similarly with Port Qasim, similarly with anybody else. So unless this land ownership basis is not taken away and given to one federal body, and I got educated on this in my several meetings which I had to have when I was drafting the tourism policy for the government of Pakistan, which made tourism put tourism on the industrial investment schedule. I realized in my interaction with the Surveyor General of Pakistan that Pakistan is fragmented for land ownership in excess of 2,000 different autonomous landowners, which includes the institutions. So unless you give it to one person, one agency, one department, and take it away from everybody else, then they will start evolving. PNSC का आप देख लें, PNSC बहुत अच्छा एग्जाम्पल है। 6 जहाज़ हैं उनके पास, 32 जहाज़ की फ्लीट ख़त्म करके 6 जहाज़ या 7 जहाज़ हैं उनके पास। तो उनका रेवेन्यू सोर्स अगर आप बैलेंस शीट उठा के देखें तो जहाज़ों से कम है, ज़मीनों से ज़्यादा है। यही हाल आपका पोर्ट का है, यही हाल आपका सिविल एविएशन का है, यही हाल आपका आर्मी का है, नेवी का है। पता नहीं हर आदमी जो है वो एक फ्यूडल लॉर्ड बना बैठा हुआ है। So they are not evolving in their own right, and they are not evolving because they are getting money, and then they are also doing land grabbing. I mean, take the army; they own 12.5% of this country. They have grabbed the land. Do you need cantonments within the city? No, you don't. So what the hell are you doing here? And we are apologetic in being able to question them कि भाई वो जनरल साहब है, वो आपको अंदर कर देंगे, वो नौकर है भाई। हमारे टैक्स उसकी तनख्वाह जाती है, चाहे वो जज हो, चाहे वो जर्नल हो, चाहे साला कोई हो। They are being paid with our taxes, and it's time we, the taxpayers, must put them on call and ask them, what the hell are you doing? Who are you working for and why? I'm sorry.
Assalamu alaikum, Mohammad Umar Waqas, Special Correspondent of Financial Daily. I have 2 questions actually. First of all, youth. You've spoken beautifully and you've given great solutions to the nation. But youth has been actually totally forgotten, ignored in this country. 65% of the total population consists of youth. नजरअंदाज हमेशा उनको किया गया. Today we actually gathered this August gathering to discuss the economic reforms. But youth is missing. How do you see the role of youth in this country?
Or,
You guys are actually the inspiration for this
Right.
country.
Right.
So where is you? For example, if we discuss about the IT and call center industry and the software houses, the entrepreneurs who started them, but as a modesty, bringing remittances in the country, creating jobs, training the youth. लेकिन they are not as that as creatively जैसे इंडिया में उनको टेकअप किया गवर्नमेंट ने अपनी IT and call center industry को अपने remittances को बहुत they have actually increased a lot. So actually Pakistani government, previous governments, current government, we actually ignored this segment, the information technology and the call center, software manufacturing, the upgradation developments. India has been actually doing a lot of, they are occupying the international market. हम ये नहीं कह सकते कि youth is not protected. Pakistani youth is in, it has incredible potential. लेकिन उनको सही से शायद कभी इस्तेमाल नहीं किया गया. How do you see this gray area of this system? How this youth can be a player of this segment?
okay. I recall a visit to one of my initial visits to America, one of the first ones, many, many years ago. And one of my relatives who was taking me around to show the city they were living in said, I'm going to introduce to you a feature of every city in America which has got a road, and that is called a drag. So I said, what happens on a drag? And they say, our youth come here and they race here. And I said, where does the youth get the money to find vehicles and motorbikes and whatever else they use the drag? We are rich. The potential of our youth, and this country is very, very fortunate because the predominant population of this country are youth, are laborers. What is the unfortunate part is that we don't have the money for the youth to give them requisite amount of education and give them the opportunity to use their skills and evolve in that. And that is why we need to link our rupee or revalue our rupee by linking it to gold, because that is what is the demand of our ideology. We cannot save in an alien currency. We cannot trade in an alien currency. Why should we? You see, at the time of Caliph, 1300 years ago, the Romans, when they were thrown out from Syria by the Muslims in the time of Hazrat Umar, the Roman currency was being used. And at that time, the Romans, because they were a retreating force, they threatened that, look, we're going to write something very blasphemous and defamatory about your prophet on our currency because that's the medium of exchange you're using. And that was, at that time, 1300 years ago, that the medium of exchange was changed. Your medium of exchange has to be evaluated on the basis of your assets in the country. Your natural resources are rich, your human resources are rich. For your currency to not represent that or reflect that is bad leadership, is a leadership that is subservient to the colonist, and that sort of leadership must be kicked out of office. You want the youth, you want the agriculturist, you want people to flourish here, empower the rupee. Do not worry about the dollar. People are crying today कि भाई dollar 200 रुपए का हो गया, 500 रुपए का हो गया. So what? It is meaningless. Why have you not empowered the rupee? And you're not empowering the rupee because when I spoke to the top brass here, the guy turned around and told me, yeah, we can't, divorce the dollar from our economy. I said, why? He said, because we're getting sensitive military equipment from America. तो जो माइंड सेट ये है कि आप अपने लोगों को एम्पावर नहीं करेंगे, आप खुद प्रोड्यूस नहीं करेंगे, आप अमेरिका 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 आप चाहते हैं। ये वो एक शेर है जो अभी याद आ गया मीर का है कि कितने सादा है कि बीमार हुए जिनके सबब उसी अवतार के लौंडे से दवा लेते हैं।
Asaf, I've got a question at a tangent. What you're saying is something which is existing today, and that is, I'm sure you're aware of, the corporate profits, you just announced at the end of this year, every corporate making the stock exchange is guilty and meaningless. The corporates are making about 40% plus profits. जिसको भी उठा के देख रहे हैं, इंग्लों को देख लें, फौजी को देख लें वगैरह जो भी, banks making plus of 40%. Now the point is कि आपको गोश्त की प्राइस बढ़ेगी मेरा ख्याल है, पर मसला नहीं पड़ेगा, आप फिर भी खाते रहेंगे, मगर आपके जो ड्राइवर है उस तक नहीं पहुंच रहा। ये जो इन्फ्लेशन है, this is the मसला, elite capture. Now in this proposal, I'm going to come to this slightly later. What is, how do you get rid of this elite capture? ये ऊपर किसी को मसला नहीं है इन्फ्लेशन का, the मसला is down, so it's not trickling down. So do we need to kind of kick in certain kind of socialism or what to get this thing organized? But this elite capture, you look at the profits of corporates, it's going up and up and up, and everyone's looking already over there. But जो नीचे है वो इन्फ्लेशन से मारा गया। ये जो है ये malaise, how do you solve that? ये कुछ।
So corporate size आपका क्या है?
Secondly, sorry,
corporate size जो है इस इकोनॉमी के अंदर, it is minuscule. It's about 300 and some odd companies on the stock exchange.
the banks, for instance, I'm talking of you run it down and you can come into a point where you can enlarge the whole. Even the agriculturists, they made a lot of profit this last cycle. So I'm trying to say we have an elite capture of this, of politics as well as economy. This is what we need to get broken down. The second thing you're trying to suggest over here is a kind of a revolution, of ideas. It's fantastic solutions that you're giving, but who's going to enforce them? How are you going to get it done? Are you going to go to Imran Khan and tell him to get it done? How are you going to enforce this? I'm okay for a classroom study, but how is it going to be done? Is there a solution to that or not?
So when I was coming here to the hall, I promised myself that I will not diverge into any political comment or any political personality. So let's keep Imran Khan out of this. You see, first thing. Number two, that when you talk of socialism being part of this agenda, it is way away from socialism. Socialism, the template for socialism is very different to what I have suggested. A fishbone structure is being used way back from 1774. If you go to the Freemasonry movement and then evolved into today's capitalist society of the US. Here, if you afford your population two basic things, literacy and buying power, and if you afford them just buying power, they'll get literacy on their own. You can forget about an elitish population usurping their rights. That is the history of sociology all over the world, at least in the last 700 years. If you pick up the Muqaddimah of Ibn Khaldun, for instance, he has presented the same thing. You have to allow the populations to fend for themselves, provided you give them education. How will you give them education unless you empower the rupee? Your rupee is in the dumps because you are following a colonial agenda. You're following colonial supremacy and subservience here. It is not acceptable, and this is being done by our leadership. And this leadership is confined to only 1,000 people or bureaucrats at the top. We, the taxpayer, our writ is give us the accountability of what the hell you're doing. And if you can't, we must just sack them. And we can only do that because we are funding them. That's all. It's very simple. आप जो कह रहे हैं कि कौन उसको enforce करेगा? We don't need the army or Imran Khan or anybody else to come and enforce it. We are there. We are there to enforce it. हम पैसे दे रहे हैं, आप पैसे दे रहे हैं, ये जो आदमी आपको चाय पिला रहा है वो पैसे दे रहा है. मैंने आपको अभी अपनी तकरीर में भी ये कहा कि इस वक्त जो टैक्सेशन का हाल है कि जो एक बच्चा एक माँ के शिकम में है वो भी टैक्स दे, क्योंकि इनडायरेक्ट टैक्सेस का जो खमीना है इट इज प्रोपोस्टरस. आप इसकी क्यों फिक्र कर रहे हैं सोशलिज्म? The thing is that we are getting together here and we will continue to get together. Because the business community is completely committed on one thing, no more investments here. If this drama, जिसको उर्दू में मैंने अभी यहाँ कहा अपनी तकरीर में कि 9 बाजों की नौटंकी है जो चल रहा है, ये जब तक चलता रहेगा भाई तुम खुद संभालो. You think the brass can handle it? And who will they handle it from? America will handle it? Is that the question?
देखिए आला साहब बहुत शुक्रिया, आपने बड़ी अच्छी बातें की हैं. आप रूट कॉज को क्यों नहीं टैकल करते? आप कभी भी इकोनॉमिकली वायबल नहीं हो सकते. आपने $130 बिलियन लोन देना है और हर महीने $4 अरब आपको पेज करते हैं उसका इंटरेस्ट. आप तो 1000 साल तक ये नहीं दे सकते और आपको IMF के कंडीशन माननी पड़ेगी. $1 बिलियन के लेने के लिए आपकी क्या हालत हो रही है? मर रहे हैं हम लोग, लेट रहे हैं उनके आगे, जो कि आपको मिल जाएंगे और डॉलर भी 184-85 के भी आ जाए. वो एक कर रहे हैं. 1160 लोगों ने, अरे 22 करोड़ लोगों को होस्टेज बनाया हुआ है पिछले 75 साल से. ये अदमिया है हमारा. क्यों हो रहा है इससे? 1160 क्या मायने रखता है 22 करोड़ के आवाम के साथ? उनको कोई पूछने वाला ही नहीं है. 1160 आदमी हम ऐसे पीछे डोला पीट कर रखते हैं. Unless you stand on your own feet, you can never succeed in your life. आपकी तनख्वाह अगर 5000 है तो भाई आप 4999 रुपये तो खर्च कर लें. 5000 20 रुपये का खर्च करें, वो 20 रुपये जो है वो आपके जान को आ जाएगा. आपके पास पैसा नहीं है, अय्याशियाँ देखो आपकी. Look at the state expenditure. They should be ashamed of themselves. लोग सड़कों पे भूखे मारे हैं. ये नहीं कह रहा कि मैं गलत बात कर रहा हूँ. हम लोग तो चीज़ें करते हैं. The solution is not in making speeches or delivering speeches or giving some points कि ऐसे करते हैं ऐसे करते हैं. The root cause, एक आदमी बीमार है, डॉक्टर के पास जाता है, वो उसको एग्जामिन करते हैं. एग्जामिन करने के बाद वो फिर उसको कुछ टेस्ट देता है. जब टेस्ट का रिजल्ट आता है उसके बाद वो मेडिसिन देता है उसको कि ये बेटा खाओ, इससे आपको आराम रहेगा. तो जब तक हम $130 बिलियन उनके मुंह पे नहीं मारेंगे उस वक्त तक यहाँ पे कुछ नहीं होगा. यही लूट जारी रहेगा, इकोनॉमिकली डिप्रेशन रहेगा.
قبلہ میں نے آپ کا 130
Sir Shah Shida. Sir, actually you emphasize a lot on the ideology that the different countries' economy grew because they adhered by their ideology. Do you think that the slogan of Islamic ideology really rhetoric to revive our economy and all, because as there are so many factions already in Islam, like created by our alamas and our mullahs and all. So how do you foresee the future of Islamic ideology, like reviving our, economy? Thanks.
साहब की जो बात की है साहब ने, हम सुनते आए हैं बचपन से कि, और हमने ये देखा भी है कि एक चीज़ इम्पोर्टेंट आती थी, उसी की कॉपी सेम होती थी और हम कहते थे कि यार ये तो लागू कीमती लग रही है, ये इम्पोर्टेंट है। यानी आज से 30 साल पहले जो काम इस वक्त चाइना कर रहा है लागू कीमती, वो हमारे जो इकोनॉमी के चैंपियन बनते हैं वो तमाम लोग, किसी ने आज तक ऐसी कोई पॉलिसी नहीं बनाई कि कराची से लेके हैदराबाद तक छोटे छोटे 120 गज के 10,000 इंडस्ट्री लगाते हैं। वो तमाम चीजें जो आप इंपोर्ट कर रहे हैं चाइना से, आपके मुल्क में बनती, आपके लोगों को मिलती और एक्सपोर्ट होती। आप 5 साल के टैक्स नहीं करते, पाकिस्तानी जो रेमिटेंस दे रहे हैं उनको आप ऑफर करते कि आप ये छोटी इंडस्ट्री को इन्वेस्ट करें, हम लोकल मार्केट में प्रोडक्ट देंगे, एक्सपोर्ट भी करेंगे, ताकि आपका पैसा बाहर जाता नहीं। ये पूरी एक साइंस है और ये कोई रॉकेट साइंस नहीं है। आपके पास लैंड भी अवेलेबल है। कभी आज तक हम सुनते हैं 150 रुपए का खर्चा है और 90 रुपए कमा रहे हैं, तो आप क्यों नहीं 300 रुपए कमाएं? 150 रुपए जिनको देना है दें, 150 रुपए में आप इकोनॉमी, हेल्थ, एजुकेशन सब पे काम करें। आज तक इसके बारे में किसी ने न सोचा है, न कोई प्लानिंग की है। बात ये है कि कोई प्लानिंग, जो इकोनॉमिक की बात की जा रही है, मैं टर्की में गया हूँ, टर्की में 120 गज के इंडस्ट्री, 120 गज के जगह पे इंडस्ट्रीज लगी हुई है। स्मॉल इंडस्ट्रीज इतनी अहम है और जो बात की जा रही है यूथ की, वो 65% यूथ भी वहाँ पे ऑटोमेटेड हो जाएगी। हमारे मुल्क में जो लोग चैंपियन बनते हैं इसके बारे में सोचा नहीं जा रहा है, इसके बारे में क्या कहें?
First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Tariq Jamil, because if I had got the mic first, I would already see point. That's very important, because we didn't mention agricultural economy throughout your speech. So I would like to add something to that, because we have already converted our cities into slums. Because we didn't pay attention to rural population, we didn't establish hospitals, education institutions, and other provision of other basic commodities there. We are major scale, 70% people are scaled in farm economy. They shifted to the cities because they wanted a better future for their children, and they didn't have any skill for industry or technology that can be used to be an employee in any industry. Their skill was only farming, and farming was not needed in the urban areas. So we developed the slums here, we encouraged crimes and everything like that. Why couldn't we pay attention to our rural population? If we had established their basic facilities like schools, dispensaries, hospitals, people would not have shifted to the cities, and that is another problem. We have destroyed our agriculture at the expense of industrialization. That was a failed promise. We couldn't develop any industrialization properly. We initiated 5-year plans, one after one, but all the plans were failed. Now, we didn't have agricultural economy, and we have a failed industrialization and promise also. That is my question. Why can't we pay attention to agriculture?
ये लास्ट क्वेश्चन है, फिर उसके बाद आप सारा काम।
अच्छा, मैं सवाल सजेशन, आपको कोई सजेशन, थोड़ा सा सजेशन नहीं दूंगा। एक छोटी सवाल, आपकी सारी चीज़ों में आपने 4 इसको फैक्टर्स को कहा है कि पार्लियामेंटेरियंस, आर्मी, जुडिशरी और ब्यूरोक्रेसी. जो आपके सजेशन थे, दे आर वेरी आइडियल. इवन गोल्ड स्टैंडर्ड इज वेरी आइडियल, बट टू गेट इम्प्लीमेंटेड, हु विल बिल्ड द कैट? इन चारों को कौन करेगा? दिस इज
ये 1 मिनट सर, नहीं सर.
My name is Naeemuddin from Delhi, Pakistan, Karachi. मैं आपसे सिर्फ ये पूछना चाहता हूँ कि इस वक्त जो मुल्क की मौजूदा इकोनॉमिकल सिचुएशन है उसमें हमको कैसे वज़ीर आज़म की ज़रूरत है, जो बेहतरीन मांगना जानता हो या अपने वसाइल से मुल्क को तरक्की देना जानता हो. परवेज़ मुशर्रफ के दौर में 2 प्राइम मिनिस्टर लाए गए थे जो बेहतरीन इकनॉमिक चला सकते थे, जिसमें शौकत अजीज़ और मियां मोहम्मद सोमरो. तो इस वक्त जो सूरत हाल है उसमें आप क्या समझते हैं कि किस किस्म के वज़ीर आज़म की इसको ज़रूरत है? क्योंकि कहा यह जा रहा है कि इस वक्त इंटरव्यूज़ हो रहे हैं वज़ीर आज़म के लिए और इस्लामाबाद में, जो कि मुल्क की सूरत हाल पर काबू पाने में बेहतरी लाएंगे.
My name is Iftikhar Ahmed. सवाल मेरा ये है कि दुनिया सूद के निज़ाम से मुंसलिक है और पाकिस्तान में सूद का खात्मा कैसे?
ठीक है सर. अच्छा, आपका भी.
आई होप यू विल नॉट. ये टॉपिक सर आपने बड़ा अच्छा रखा हुआ है, बिजनेस स्टेबिलिटी डिमांड्स पर इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म. हमारी तो इकोनॉमी नहीं है, तो क्या रिफॉर्म आप करना चाहते हैं? जो पैसे आ रहे हैं वही आप दे देते हैं, ये हमारी इकोनॉमी है. थैंक यू सर.
Respond to your question first, because it's a question of our demand. The existence of an economy is, by definition, related to the availability of 3 factors: where there is territory, where there is population, and therefore there is an economy. Right? So the economy does exist. The demand is very simple. The demand is that right now our economy is a captive in the hands of the institutions. It's a coup of the servants over the employers. We are the employers. The 4 institutions consisting of 2.6 million people are servants. They have freed themselves from audit. They have freed themselves from being questioned because of laws. We are saying कि भाई 70% आप का यहाँ से, इस शहर से खाली इस मुल्क को चलाने के लिए जा रहे हैं पैसे. 2.6 मिलियन लोगों के ऊपर 82% आपके बजट का खर्च हो रहा है, और हम पूछ नहीं सकते कैसे हो, क्यों? 222 मिलियन लोगों के लिए जो हमारी आबादी है उस पर आप 18% रख रहे हैं, और आप 2.6 के ऊपर 82% खर्च कर रहे हैं. ये क्या है? फ्री द इकोनॉमी, प्लीज फ्री द इकोनॉमी, गेट आउट, रिमेन अकाउंटेबल. यू सी, ये हम लोग बुत परस्त नहीं है. एक आदमी को आपने पकड़ा, उसको आपने वर्दी पहना दी, उसको टोपी पहना दी, या उसको विग पहना दिया, जज बना दिया, या उसको जनरल बना दिया. उसके बाद आप उसकी पूजा करने बैठ गए कि भाई तुमसे बड़ा कोई नहीं. ये क्या है? He is a servant. He is a public servant. He is accountable. He has to be accountable. That's it. That's our demand. You cannot, absolutely cannot, allow them a free hand. We are wanting to liberate the economy. Let's put it this way. If that satisfies your question. Sir, your question was about the settlement of $130 billion. Now to me that is printed paper. He's right behind us. That to me is printed paper. Now, If it was for a frivolous purposes, we could have put a better picture on our printed paper. So printed paper does not have an intrinsic value in economics in its own right. It only represents the strength of another economy. Today the American economy is a deficit economy. So why are we worried about the dollar? Why aren't we saving in the dollar? Precisely. So why are we following it? We can't do that का सवाल ही नहीं है ना. बिल्कुल सवाल नहीं है सर. You're a handful of people at the top are forcing this down our throats. It is not their right to do it. When I'm saying link the rupee to the gold, your one rupee becomes equivalent to $5.11. 1 rupee. They will not do it. Why will they not do it? Because they are following a colonial agenda. That's all.
That is the point. Again, who will let them do it?
प्रोग्राम के आखिर में इस वक्त मैं कराची लीडर्स क्लब के सेक्रेटरी जनरल अमजद नकवी साहब से कहूँगा कि वो एक वोट ऑफ थैंक्स के लिए स्टेज पर आए और उन्होंने एक क्वेश्चन भी करना है.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम. क्वेश्चन की तो बारी नहीं आई, वोट ऑफ थैंक यू कर देता हूँ. कि सबसे ज़्यादा तो शुक्रिया जनाब मिर्ज़ा शाहनवाज आगा साहब का कि उन्होंने इतना खूबसूरत आप एक लेक्चर दिया, इतना प्रपोजल दिया, पाकिस्तान की इकोनॉमी के रिवाइवल के लिए बहुत ही खूबसूरत प्लान दिया. अगर काश इस पर अमल हो जाए. क्वेश्चन भी मैं साथ साथ ही कर दूँ. तो उसके बाद सबसे पहले तो शुक्रिया मैंने आगा साहब का अदा किया कि बिलाशुबा आपका प्लान बहुत ज़बरदस्त है और हमारे तमाम मसाइल का हल है. आपने अपने प्लान में एक तरफ तो हमारी मुल्की ब्यूरोक्रेसी को चैलेंज किया है और दूसरे आपने इंटरनेशनल ब्यूरोक्रेसी को चैलेंज किया है. तो चैलेंजेस ही हैं इसमें, इंटरनेशनल भी और ये भी. दूसरी ये कि जैसे आपने बड़ा अच्छा प्लान है कि हम 34,000 यूनिट बना लें या 34,000 म्यूनसिपल कंपनीज बना लें 50 से 60,000 लोगों की, और वो स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में लिस्टेड हो जाएँ. स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में लिस्टेड हो जाएंगी तो उसका एक तरीकाकार होता है. अभी तो हमारे पूरे पाकिस्तान में कोई 350-400 कंपनियां ट्रेड होती हैं, 700-750 लिस्टेड हैं, लेकिन ट्रेडिंग सिर्फ 300-350 कंपनियों में रह जाती है. अब 3,400 कंपनियां लिस्टेड होंगी तो उनका पेडअप कैपिटल क्या होगा, उनका मैकेनिज्म क्या होगा, उनका रेवेन्यू मॉडल क्या होगा, टैक्सेशन का मॉडल क्या होगा, ये काफ़ी सारी बातें तशरीही में रह जाती हैं. और सबसे बड़ा अच्छा हमें अपनी आइडियोलॉजी की तरफ जाने के लिए आपने जैसे कहा कि हमें गोल्ड बेस अच्छी करनी चाहिए, और ये तो यकीन करेंगे हमारे पास स्टेट बैंक के पास मुद्दतों से 64 मैट्रिक टन सोना है, लेकिन लोगों के पास आवाम में कुछ 64,000 टन पड़ा होगा. अब वो उसको इम्प्लीमेंट कैसे होगा, उसका तरीकाकार कैसे होगा, ये सारी बातें कुछ सहन में आ रही थी. यकीन आपका ये पूरा प्लान होगा तो कुछ इसमें ये तशरीही भी थी, लेकिन जिस तरह से आपने पूरा प्लान दिया है तो हम इमीडिएट अपना सारा डेटा भी ऑफ कर देंगे. जैसे आपने भट्ट साहब ने कहा कि पहले आप उनके 130 बिलियन उनके मुँह में मारें और फिर अपने डेटा सोचें. तो ये 130 बिलियन जैसे आपने कहा 3,400 कंपनियाँ बनेंगी, उनका पेडअप कैपिटल होगा. हमने अपना प्लान किया है, उसके अंदर लिखा है कि वो जैसे कि अर्नेस मनी के तौर पर ये हमारी वो सारा का सारा भी ऑफ कर सकते हैं. ये बात तो समझ में आती है. तो बस ये चंद एक बातें थी, अगर आप इसका थोड़ा सा जवाब दे दें तो फिर मैं बाकी लोगों का भी शुक्रिया अदा करता हूँ.
पहले तो मैं आपका शुक्रिया अदा करूँ कि आपने ये सारा मुझे मौका फराहम किया कि मैं अपने ख़यालात का इजहार कर सकूँ और बिज़नेस कम्युनिटी की जानिब से हम लोगों की जो सोच है उसको कम से कम मीडिया के सामने लेके आ सकूँ. ये जो प्लान बनते हैं, जिस तरह के प्रपोजल दिया गया है, लिंकेज ऑफ करेंसी या एक स्टॉक एक्सचेंज के ऊपर 3,400 कंपनियों का लाना, म्यूनिसिपल कंपनियों का लाना, जबकि हमारे पास 360 या 364 कंपनियाँ ऑलरेडी हैं और सिसक रही हैं। बकौल जैदी साहब के यहाँ पे वो बहुत अच्छे प्रॉफिट कमा रही हैं, मगर जो उनका एवरेज है, रेटेड एवरेज है, अगर इन्फ्लेशन को उसमें डाला जाए, so they are earning within not 40%, but between, if you minus the inflationary factor, then they're making not more than 7% combined together, consolidated. अब आपको दीगर एक्सपेरिमेंट से मुस्तफ़ीज़ होना पड़ेगा कि जो इस वक्त हालिया जो एक्सपेरिमेंट था, एक तो अमेरिकन एक्सपेरिमेंट है फॉर रीवैम्पिंग द स्टॉक एक्सचेंजेस, और हाल में जो यूरोप में हुआ है कि दे हैव म्यूचुअलाइज्ड द एक्सचेंजेस फॉर यूरोपियन कंपनीज, एंड इसके अंदर सडनली एक एक स्टॉक एक्सचेंज के अंदर जो ग्रोथ फैक्टर था इंटीग्रेशन की वजह से यूरोपियन यूनियन के, वो बेतहाशा है। I mean, I am sorry, but I don't remember the exact percentage, but that is really an exponential growth out there. कैपिटलाइजेशन जब होता है तो कैपिटलाइजेशन जब म्यूनिसिपल कंपनी का होता है तो उसके अंदर जो आप सर्विसेज प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं उसको फैक्टर इन किया जाता है। फैक्टर इन करने के बाद वही आपका बेस कैपिटल बनता है एज डेट, not as something which is provided, that is debt which is serviced over a period of time. जिसके लिए एक रेवेन्यू स्ट्रीम मैंने यहाँ पे सजेस्ट किया है, और वो रेवेन्यू स्ट्रीम जो है वो उसको पुल करता है on a protracted basis, on a yearly basis, and it takes care of the capitalization needs of an urban unit. आपका जो आखिरी पॉइंट था गालिबन वो ये था कि हम लोग इसको किस तरह लागू कर सकेंगे। तो ये चूँकि गैर सियासी एक महफिल है और गैर सियासी हम लोग भी हैं यहाँ पे जो बैठे हैं, हम लोगों का जो नज़रिया है वो सिर्फ एक बुनियाद के ऊपर हमारा डिमांड है, हमारा जो मुतालबा है वो सिर्फ एक है कि भाई पैसे हम देते हैं, एम्प्लॉयर्स हम हैं, नौकर तुम बजट का 82% खा रहे हो, हमें ज़रा हिसाब किताब दो।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया मिर्ज़ा साहब। जैसे कि हमारा काफ़ी खूबसूरत प्रोग्राम का आज इनकाद हुआ और ये प्रोग्राम हमारा परसों होना था, तो मगर होटल में जगह मांगने की वजह से हमें आज करना पड़ा, और आज हमारे इस प्रोग्राम में शहबाज शरीफ साहब टपक पड़े और पूरे शहर के रास्ते हमारे PIDC में बन रहे लोगों को काफ़ी मुश्किलात हुई, और उस मुश्किलात में जितने लोग पहुंच सके। और फिर ये कि हमारे जो ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ बिजनेस कम्युनिटी था, तो आज सारी कराची चैम्बर की बिजनेस कम्युनिटी को प्राइम मिनिस्टर साहब ने बुलाया हुआ था, तो हमारी काफ़ी बिजनेस कम्युनिटी जो ज़्यादातर लोग हैं वो वहाँ इंगेज हो गए, क्योंकि शहबाज शरीफ साहब तो कभी कभी आते हैं और आबा साहब तो हर वक्त हमारे दरमियान मौजूद रहते हैं। तो इसके साथ ही मैं अपने सबके नाम तो नहीं लूँगा वरना और टाइम ज़ाया हो जाएगा, काफ़ी टाइम हो चुका है। तमाम दोस्तों का शुक्रिया जो इतनी सोबत उनके साथ आज सदस्ते बन के और यहाँ तक पहुँचे। और आखिर में मैं गुजारिश करूँगा मुबशर मीर साहब से कि मिर्ज़ा शाहनवाज आबा साहब को कराची रीडर्स क्लब का मोमेंटो पेश करें। कर्नल साहब, अब्दुल आफरीदी साहब, हसीन सरवर, ये टेबल अगर हटा दें आप टेबल ना
पीछे
कमाल मुरई साहब, नजीब जाफरी साहब, हमेरा साहबा, अंजुम, नादिश, आप
निशिकांत कौन?
सब आ जाएंगे इंशाल्लाह। हाँ जी। सर सब पहले जाए तो प्रेजेंट वेट सर इधर के वेट एक मिनट चलेगा, एक मिनट सर थोड़ा पूछा है वेट
मेरा साहब आप भी आ जाए।
किताब दें अब आप किताब देखिए, अब आप किताब देखिए, ये किताब लिखिए, अब आप किताब आप इस तरफ मूव तो करेंगे, भाई इस तरफ मूव करेंगे। Yes. Yeah, smile, yeah. Thank you.
साहब आ जाए, एक ग्रुप फोटो सबके साथ।
हाँ
आ जाए।
इमरान को बुलाओ।
अलावा साहब आ जाए।
रफीक भाई वेट